Before we begin, if you enjoy intense, emotional, and unforgettable stories that stay with you long after they end, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the story you're about to hear is not just shocking. It's something that changed a life forever. And trust me, by the end of this, you won't look at silence or secrets the same way again. Everything happened so quickly. And yet, every single second of that night feels permanently carved into my memory. I remember the door, the way I pushed it open, slowly, carefully, trying not to make a sound. I thought he was asleep. That's what I told myself. That's what I expected. But what I saw instead froze me completely in place. I couldn't move. Sprawled across the bed, completely unaware that his world and mind was about to shift in a way neither of us could undo. For a moment, I told myself to leave, close the door, walk away, pretend. I never saw anything that would have been the right thing to do, but I didn't. Something unfamiliar stirred inside me. Not curiosity, not exactly. Something deeper, something more dangerous. Heartbeat began to rise, slow at first, then faster, then uncontrollable. And before I realized what I was doing, I stepped inside. But before I take you deeper into what happened that night, I just want to say thank you to every single person who has subscribed, liked, or shared these stories. Your support means more than you think. And as this story unfolds, I want you to tell me honestly in the comments, what would you have done? In my place now, let me take you back. My name is Claire. I'm 36 years old, and I live what most people would call a perfect life. A quiet, suburban home, a stable marriage, a routine that never changed. From the outside, everything looked calm, predictable, safe. But sometimes, the calmest lives hide the loudest silences. My husband Mark traveled often for work. Days turned into nights, and nights turned into long stretches of quiet loneliness. I filled my time with anything I could, cleaning, baking, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging, just to feel like time was moving. Truly believed I had found stability, but stability isn't always the same as happiness. Sometimes it's just stillness, cold, unmoving stillness. And then there was Logan. Old, tall, confident, restless. The kind of person who carried energy into a room without even trying. He wasn't like his father, where Mark was structured. Logan was unpredictable, where Mark followed rules. Logan tested them. We barely spoke beyond simple greetings. Morning, evening, dinner's ready. That was the extent of it. Until that night, it started like any other evening rain, tapping gently against the windows. A soft, steady rhythm that made the house feel even quieter than usual. The scent of vanilla candles filled the living room. I was curled up on the couch with a book, trying to escape that familiar feeling creeping in again. Loneliness. Mark had called earlier. His flight was delayed. He wouldn't be home until the next day. I remember sighing, closing my book halfway through a page, realizing I hadn't absorbed a single word. Eventually, I decided to go upstairs early. Just sleep through the silence. That was the plan. Simple, normal, safe. But then, as I walked past Logan's room, I heard something. A sound faint, strained, almost like discomfort. I stopped. Every instinct told me something might be wrong. Was he hurt? Sick? Without thinking, I reached for the door and pushed it open. What I saw was not what I expected. Not even close. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't injured. He was completely aware, and suddenly, he wasn't alone anymore. Because he had seen me, time slowed down. Everything felt suspended, like the world had paused. Just to force that moment to exist, I should have left immediately. But something held me there, not physically, mentally, emotionally, like my mind was struggling to catch up with what my eyes had already understood. And then, he looked directly at me. No panic, no embarrassment, just awareness, and something else. something I couldn't quite name at the time, Claire. The way he said my name, it wasn't casual, it wasn't awkward, it was intentional. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a moment I had walked into, it was a moment that was pulling me in. My thoughts were racing. This is wrong, you need to leave right now. But my body didn't listen. Instead, I took a step forward, then another, each step heavier than the last dot, each step more irreversible. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I wasn't acting like myself. It felt like standing at the edge of something dangerous, and knowing you shouldn't jump but feeling like you already have dot. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. Charged, unspoken, uncertain, and yet undeniable. That was the moment everything changed. Not because of what happened next, but because of what I didn't stop. Because once a line is crossed, you don't get to redraw it. You just live with what comes after. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. Not loud, not chaotic, just dense, like the air itself had thickened around us. I remember standing there, aware that I had crossed into something I didn't fully understand, yet not an action, not even a decision, but a shift, something internal. And once something shifts inside you, it rarely shifts back the same way. Neither of us spoke for what felt like forever then. Slowly, I stepped back. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, just one small step. As if my body was finally catching up with what my mind had been trying to say all along. This shouldn't have happened, I whispered. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded distant, detached, like it belonged to someone else standing. In that room, Logan didn't respond immediately. He sat there, watching me, not with confusion, but with a kind of calm that unsettled me even more. You didn't leave, he finally said. Simple words, but they landed heavily, because they were true. I hadn't left, and now, I couldn't pretend I didn't understand why. I turned away, quickly, almost stumbling as I moved toward the door. My hand gripped the handle harder than necessary. Forget this, I said. We both need to forget this. But even as I said it, I knew how impossible that sounded. I walked out without waiting for an answer that night. Sleep never came. I lay in bed, staring into the darkness, replaying everything over and over again. Every second, every hesitation, every moment I should have stopped. Regret doesn't always arrive as a sharp pain. It's quieter than that. A slow, steady weight pressing down on you. Morning came too quickly. The sunlight that filled the room felt almost offensive. Too bright for something I wanted to keep hidden. I stayed in bed longer than usual, hoping irrationally that avoiding the day might undo the night. But time doesn't work like that. Eventually, I forced myself up. The house was quiet, too quiet. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Maybe he had already left. Maybe I could have a few hours to think, to reset, to pretend. I went through my routine. Mechanically, shower, clothes, hair tied back without much care. Everything felt distant, controlled, until I stepped into the kitchen and saw him. Logan stood by the counter, completely at ease, as if nothing had happened. That calmness, it unsettled me more than anything else, because I was anything but calm. I froze for just a second, barely noticeable, but enough for him to catch. Morning, he said. His tone was normal, casual to normal. Morning, I replied quickly, turning away to busy myself with anything, opening the fridge, reaching for ingredients I didn't even need. I could feel his eyes on me, not intense, not aggressive, just present, and that presence made it impossible to ignore what stood between us now. You're avoiding me, he said after a moment. I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the counter. I'm acting like nothing happened, I replied. That's what we both should be doing. A pause, then a quiet, almost thoughtful response. But something did happen. I closed my eyes briefly. Yes, I said, and it was a mistake. The word hung in the air. Mistake. It felt like the safest word to use. The only word that created distance. When I turned to face him, I expected resistance, but instead, he nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in understanding. Then we move forward, he said. That surprised me. Forward, I repeated. As if it doesn't define everything, he clarified. For the first time since that night, something inside me loosened slightly. Not relief, but a possibility. Maybe it didn't have to spiral. Maybe it could stay contained. A moment that happened and then ended. Yes, I said firmly. We move forward. The rest of that day passed in a strange, quiet balance. We didn't avoid each other completely, but we were careful. Measured, every interaction felt deliberate, as if both of us were testing what normal looked like now. And slowly, something shifted again, not back to what it was before, but into something quieter, more controlled. By the time evening came, I felt steadier, not at peace, but stable enough to function. And then Mark came home. His presence filled the house in a way that grounded everything instantly. Familiar, predictable, safe. He greeted me with the same warmth he always had, completely unaware of the storm that had passed through these walls just hours before, and that was when it truly hit me. Not guilt in the dramatic sense, but awareness of how fragile everything really was, of how easily a single moment could unravel an entire life. That night, as we sat together at dinner talking about his trip, about ordinary things, made a quiet decision, not out of fear, not out of shame, but out of clarity. Some lines, once crossed, show you exactly why they existed in the first place, and the only real choice after that is whether you keep going or you step back before everything breaks. In the weeks that followed, life settled again. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but steadily. Logan and I returned to something close to what we had before, distant, respectful, careful. That unspoken moment between us never disappeared, but it no longer controlled the space it became. A reminder of vulnerability, of impulse, of the quiet dangers that live in loneliness. And as for me, I started paying attention to the things I had ignored before, the silence in my marriage, the distance I had accepted as normal, the parts of myself I had quietly set aside, because the truth is, that night didn't just change what happened between two people. It forced me to confront something deeper. That emptiness, if left unchecked, will always find a way to be filled. The question is never if, it's how. And that's the part no one talks about, not the moment itself, but what comes after, the choices, the restraint, the quiet rebuilding of boundaries, because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not giving in again, but choosing every single day not to. That was the night everything almost changed, but in the end, it became the moment that forced everything to finally face the truth. And sometimes that's the only way a life can begin to move in the right direction again.